Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar news update video. I've got a few things to cover here. There's only probably one big piece of news which we will get to. I will first mention this, just in case you missed it on Twitter, and that is that I did make a guest appearance on the Finding Monster Right podcast, where the kind of monster of that episode was Rava, so there was quite a bit of Rava discussion, but I'd say actually the main topic was actually sort of some speculation about what the next Avatar, the one after Korra, might actually be. So it's a fun kind of thing that just kind of came about, and it's a kind of different style of podcast as well. There's a lot of kind of joking kind of humor in this one, but still some good detailed discussion as well. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you want to hear about those topics. But we'll get into the big news here. So Avatar News posted this. The source, as he links there, is actually Daniel RPK, which is actually where a lot of the early kind of insider information has been coming from about Avatar Studios. So this is the reveal. So apparently it is set 12 years after the end of the animated series. Aang will be 24, Katara will be 26, and those two, Aang and Katara, will be the lead characters. Sokka is going to be 27 and will be a supporting character. Toph will be 24 and Zuko will be 28, and their roles are unknown. So I think that makes a lot of sense. We are going to see all of these characters in this movie, but they seem to be suggesting, just based on this, that Aang and Katara are going to be the leads. And I think that makes sense. It's going to be this is going to be the Avatar, Aang-focused movie. And especially with Zuko theoretically getting his own movie the kind of following year, I think it makes sense why we're not doing a heavy Zuko focus here. We'll see what exactly they do here, but the main thing here is sort of more clarification on the exact timeline of when it's set, because there's a lot of speculation about, are we talking about like the characters are going to be like, say, like everyone's at least 18? Are we talking about early 20s? But actually what we get here, mid 20s. So it's sort of right on that edge of sort of like YA into sort of like kind of like full adult, but it's still interesting to kind of speculate about. Now, the main thing here, and I'll just bring up this document here so we can go off this, is obviously there's a lot of kind of like, oh, where does this mean in relation to other kind of little bits and pieces that we know about? So I just did this kind of like document to kind of guide you through the process in case you don't know how we sort of calculate some of this stuff, because we don't know ages of specific characters. We don't have exact set details on a lot of this stuff, so much of it is sort of the fandom figuring it out through the numbers that we do have. So just at the start here, I just note that, technically throughout a lot of this, anytime I mention Aang and Katara, the age should technically be sort of like two numbers, because we don't technically know exactly what age they are, and just highlighting that I'm going to use the older number, assuming that the characters have aged by a year over the course of the series, even though it's technically like 9 months and stuff like that. Using the logic that most people accept that Aang died at 66, so I'll use the sort of, 1 year older. So Aang is 13 at the end of ATLA. We know he's 12 at the start. I think you understand that logic. So if Aang is 13 at the end of ATLA, that means Katara is 15 at the end of ATLA. Korra, The Legend of Korra, is set 70 years after the end of ATLA. That would mean that if Aang was actually alive in Korra, he would be 83 years old. That means Katara is 85 years old. So that's how we know her age in Korra. Korra, of course, is 17 at the start of Korra. And also we know Tenzin is 51 at the start of Korra. If you take Korra's age away from Aang's theoretical age, you get the age he died at, and that is 66. If you take Tenzin's age, of course, away from Katara's age in Korra, you get the kind of age Katara was when she gave birth to Tenzin. So that is 34, and like I said up here, it's like 33/34. We don't know exactly, but it's in or around that. This also means that Aang was 32 when Tenzin was born. Then we get the idea here with regards to the siblings, because we're trying to figure out, like, do they have kids at all at this point? So Bumi and Kaya are both older than Tenzin. Bumi seems to be around 8 to 10 years older than Tenzin, and maybe 4 to 6 years older than Kaya. And this is all based on the family picture, which is probably the most obvious place to get a clear distinction of like how old they all are, where you have a very young Tenzin here. And you can clearly see that, say, like Tenzin to Bumi. Like, Bumi in this picture looks to me to be at least sort of 9, 10. You could maybe even go maybe a little bit older here. But it looks like there's in or around a sort of 8, 9, 10 year gap between Bumi and Tenzin. And then between, like, say, Bumi and Kaya looks to be like maybe, what, 3, 4, give or take. So it maybe puts it as like, you know, I was probably slightly off with this. This is maybe probably like 3, 4, 5 maybe years, and maybe not quite 6 years between the two of them. But again, it depends. Like, if I'm saying this is 10 and this is 4, that's the way it ends up working out. So in the movie, Aang is said to be 24, Katara 26. This means the movie is set 8 years before Tenzin is born. Katara at 26 versus Katara at 34. That's where that comes from. Meaning, Kaya hasn't been born yet. And depending on Bumi's exact gap to his siblings, he is potentially at most maybe like 2 years old in this movie. But they could go as far as, I suppose, he's maybe about to be born or something like that. Now, for the sake of the movie, I don't think they will probably have Katara be pregnant in the movie. Otherwise, I think that would sort of set her role in that. Like, I think we want to see Katara in action in this movie. So her being pregnant would take her out of a lot of that action. So I'm going to assume that Bumi probably has been born at this point. I think the timeline works out just about to why they might have a young, very young Bumi to maybe up to 2 years old Bumi, give or take. And I think that's fine. I think that does make a lot of sense. They have a little bit of room to work with here to still make this work. And it's up to you about, you know, which do you view as being the more important thing? Like, do you value like jumping ahead and seeing them as young parents or kind of parents to be? It's an interesting one to think about. So, the movie, of course, is set 12 years after the end of ATLA and around 8, 9 years after the events of Imbalance. So even if factoring in the comics, this movie does look like it's going to be set quite a bit into the future. Like, if we're already dealing with Proto-Republic City 8, 9 years, you can see the idea that in, like, give or take a full decade, we're going to see huge evolution. Now, will we see full-on Republic City here? Are we going to see the formation, like the founding day effectively of Republic City? What are we dealing with here? Because again, the movie maybe is called Echoes and Aftershocks. It's maybe called Hidden Kingdom. How does this all work out in regards to what we're doing? But the point is, we're going to be seeing the characters at, you know, a reasonable kind of age here. So that's all kind of cool. My take compared to the Old Friends poster is probably that it's probably close-ish to this, but I think most people have always interpreted this as maybe this being the characters as being slightly older than they're kind of like framing them at here. This is probably like a couple of years on from even what we'll be dealing with in the movie, but still it's always our best look at, you know, what the characters actually kind of do look like. So that's really, really cool that we do know that. Next, we have 5 new displates for Avatar did come out. Now, I completely forgot over the last week or so to post about this, but they went from having 39 to having 44, and these are the new ones. So a really nice Katara and Sokka image is now available. I think that's actually really, really nice, especially the Katara. Ozai full shot. So if you like Ozai, like this seems like the perfect sort of like Ozai displayed image. And then we got the kind of tea shop here, Jasmine Dragon, Iroh and Zuko, which is kind of nice. The Appa, which you can also see I have over there. I actually got this one. So you can see it over there. Very, very nice. And then the final one is this Katara. So still no kind of, you know, like book 3 Katara. It's still just like a slight expansion on the sort of general selection that they have right now. These 5 don't add that much extra to it, But, they said they will continue to add stuff, as we go on. So, keep that in mind, of course. Next, we have the idea that this has already happened, actually. Happened, last night. Avatar Generations has finally, nearly a month into launch here, actually released some new content. So they have added Omashu to the game, so you can finally advance onwards from Shenguan and Razor Reef onto Omashu. And it's pretty good. Obviously you get through it pretty quickly, but it's important that they have some of this stuff. And there's some nice updates as well that you now have 12 teams available to you. There's a bunch of bug fixes and stuff like this here. There is now a Boomy summon banner in the game where you can get the Boomy character. And a bunch more event challenges style stuff. So if you really commit to grinding through them and doing what those event challenges are, you can actually get quite a lot of items. I got a bunch of summons kind of last night, earlier on today, going through a lot of this stuff. So pretty cool. And they're also very much teasing the idea that the arena, the extra feature, is on the way sooner rather than later. They're also sort of behind the scenes on the Discord teasing the idea that they're trying, I think, to almost negotiate with Avatar Studios to release some sort of a roadmap, which I think is important, because it is notable that it's taken a month after launch to finally release just Omashu. So when is Imprisoned coming? How long is it going to take to put Imprisoned in the game? Because Omashu is a pretty notable location. But say Imprisoned is going to be, it's a much more low-key episode. So how big of an issue are you going to make out of that? Not to mention the fact that we still have to eventually add Korra, Kyoshi content, all this stuff into the game as well. When is this coming? There needs to be a better sense for overall exactly what we're doing. But I will say, I'm still enjoying the game for sure. It's just in terms of content, I don't really think there's too much to talk about with it, in that there's slight expansions in the Omashu stuff. You can see here's a screenshot I took from it when they revealed the name here, Bonzu Pipimalopsicopolis III. Now interestingly, I did note this, they spell it differently here compared to where we got the name on the old trading card game. And I note I actually prefer this kind of spelling of it, where you actually have the kind of dash in the middle to highlight that it's kind of almost a double barrel name rather than just being one continuous thing like this. I think it seems a little bit more fitting to use this spelling, but I guess this is the official spelling. But either way, that's it. There's some extra stuff, like I said, and it's very minor. It's there's a guard in front of the delivery, shoot situation, and you can only get past him if you go over to the restaurant and get him the food that he wants. And so there you're sort of, resource things of you have to get a ticket from this node to buy the food, and then you go over to him to get, and it's just stuff tiny little things like that, where in terms of new characters we get sort of shopkeepers and some thugs kind of thing. There's nothing very notable with the extra content in Omashu so far anyway. But it adds a new boss battle with Boomy into the menus and stuff like that, so that's kind of nice as well. But yeah, like I said, the game, I'm enjoying it, but it definitely I hope there's a better cadence of releases as we go forward. Then we get into the podcast, the Braving the Elements podcast. The most recent episode from this week was an episode where they had Mike, Bryan, and Andrea Romano, the voice director, on. And it was sort of the In Memory of Mako episode, where they were obviously going to talk a lot about Iroh, about Mako himself. And I was alerted to the fact that partway through this episode, Mike and Bryan talk a little bit about sort of the backstory of Iroh, and it kind of caught some people's attention that, is there new information here? How interesting is this? So let's go through this. So I think this is about 4 or 5 minutes of the podcast here. So just so you have the full context for what's going on here, this is, I think, 28 minutes into this podcast, and you'll see what happens here.
the way he was and what had happened to his son as you were kind of first incepting the show?
We're still discovering things about Iroh. So I will say, like, these characters, like always, we start with an idea and a kind of general backstory of where they came from and why they're in this story. And, some characters more about than others, but, certainly his was a story we had the broad strokes of, like, he was this, legendary general, now retired, now stuck on this boat with his nephew, and, had a contentious history with his brother and his family. You don't really know, but certainly as with everything on Avatar, like, in the writer's room and over the years, we got deeper into it, depending on the story and what we needed to reveal. But then, coming back years later to work on more Avatar stories, we're still talking about Iroh and his family and, what made him tick and all that stuff. So that's the cool thing about these characters. I think they are so layered that you can keep coming back to them and discovering new things about them, even in the context of what you already know. Like, we're not like changing his past, we're just digging deeper.
Yeah,
and it's always not.
And I'll just stop it there for a second. Nothing so far that you would say is like new. That's very general, like, oh yeah, we roughly planned it out. And when he talks about coming back to it years later, does he mean Korra in relation to Avatar, or is he talking about like the little bits and pieces in, say, like the comics, Legacy of the Fire Nation, Avatar Legends role-playing game, or is he talking about the fact that they are still talking about Iroh in the context of, like, Avatar Studios, like, these days, basically? It's somewhat, like, unclear, but so far nothing new.
The way he was, and what had happened to his son.
Hedrick was so great at writing,
Sure.
and all the writers, but like especially Tim Hedrick was so great at writing Irohisms, just dropping these knowledge bombs, these wisdom bombs. And what's great is that you get the sense from his character that knowledge was earned. It's not just something he read in a book. This is like, there was our original conception of the character, and then there's the one that was developed with Aaron and with Mako. And what I like is that both are accurate. It's just there's more layers, and there's who he was and who he's become. And you get the idea that he is a person worthy of giving advice because he started in a very different place. I know there's a lot of discussion about the not so good stuff about Iroh and the side of the war that he was on. But that's what I.
So far, again, like, nothing particularly new, though it's interesting that Bryan, speaking now, is talking more directly about sort of the contrast between the Iroh we know as the one helping Zuko, amazing wisdom, and is beginning to bring in the idea of, like, who was Iroh before? And addressing some of the fan discussion about this, of, like, was he, like, full-on representative of a lot of the Fire Nation? Was he at one point on a path to become sort of the next Sozin Azulon? Or was he always different? Because I think it's important to note that evolution, that, like, I think prior to stuff like, say, Legacy of the Fire Nation coming out, prior to even Avatar Legends role-playing game and what it clarified about, like, the placement of some of the events in his life, a lot of people were leaning more in the direction of, like, Iroh maybe was more of a character heading down that villainous path, partly because I think people will often over-exaggerate the whole "and burn it before I burn it to the ground" line when he gives his communication and, like, Ursa's reading it. But even factoring that in, we know that, like, Ursa always considered Iroh different than, like, the entire rest of the family. It was sort of like her kids and Iroh were the shining lights of her time being a member of the royal family. And that tells you, I think, a lot as well, that, okay, he was always, to some degree, a bit of an enlightened character, but he still had a journey. There were still issues in his kind of younger life, when he was younger, of course. So let's keep going here.
But that's what I find really interesting about characters is you don't choose where you're born. You don't choose what family you're in. And, his character in particular had the weight of an entire country on his shoulders and was sort of forced into battle. And
okay, so we have to stop it there. This is, to me, probably the most interesting line from the whole thing. Okay, weight of an entire nation on his shoulders. You understand that. He is the prince of the Fire Nation. He's the firstborn. He's next in line to the throne at this point. So you understand sort of like, okay, expectation on his shoulders for where the nation is going. And during this time, I guess, the war is at a more kind of interesting spot and the nation is asking for a little bit more or whatever. But then you get that what Bryan says there, and it's like, forced into battle. What does that mean? Because this has always been an interesting point with Iroh, is the whole General Iroh. He becomes the Dragon of the West, and he's known as this legendary general. Ozai isn't known for this. Like, we have no idea if Ozai ever went into battle, and apart from sort of like organizational stuff from the kind of background as like the leader of the Fire Nation, we don't have any idea if he ever went onto the battlefield or anything like that. With Iroh, we know that to be the case. And now there's the whole destiny aspect, which they don't bring up, the idea that he had this vision, this dream that he would take Ba Sing Se, and that he misinterpreted that dream. And obviously he gets it right in the end, but initially taking it for the Fire Nation was an issue. But still, forced into battle, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that because of the expectation on him from the people, from his father, that he felt like he had to join the military and make an effort to end the war, win it for the Fire Nation? Bryan goes into this a little bit more as we go on. But obviously, I think after this, it starts to get very much more his opinion on theoretically the way things could go, rather than lock this in as canonically the exact details of what happened.
Had the weight of an entire country on his shoulders and was sort of forced into battle, and was I find it more valuable to have a character who goes through an arc, gains the self-awareness, realizes this is not me, this is not what I want, and this isn't what he wanted ultimately for the Fire Nation. And that's what he's doing with Zuko, is he has kind of given up hope for himself and what he can do for the Fire Nation, but he thinks, if what I can do is instill what I've learned and a different set of values into my nephew, then that might save our nation and might save the world, So I get it. It's easy to say, well, that he's a war criminal and this and that, and you can certainly take that perspective. We don't know what he did. We haven't outlined what his deeds in battle, but I do like to believe that even amongst that conflict, he was not a ruthless, brutal, killer. I think he was trying to win so that he could bring a swift end to the war. I think that was his goal, was to end this. I don't think he loved the conflict. He was just trying to end it so that there could be an end to the fighting. But
so that's probably the secondary kind of like big thing of like, again, you can't, I think, full on wog this and like words of God here of like, this is now canon, what exactly happened. But it is interesting to see their perspective on the way they talk about Iroh, given that obviously they haven't fully fleshed out a lot of this stuff. Talking about the idea that part of the reason he might have been more of a general and more heavily involved there is, yes, he wants to win the war, but from the perspective of trying to end the war as quick as possible, because this is the way to bring peace, that he sort of understands that, like, while Azulon is still in charge, like, the Fire Nation are never going to surrender and the war will never end on that side of things. So what if I try and come in here and in kind of the most honorable way, best way possible, swiftly end the war and go from there? Because that's the thing. Iroh is next in line to be Fire Lord, and he has different ideals as a character. We know this because we have clarification now that him meeting Ran and Shaw, him meeting the Ancient Sun Warriors and being proven worthy, happened before the Siege of Ba Sing Se. Similarly, him learning lightning redirection also happened before this. So he was already studying the Four Nations, had already been proven worthy by Ran and Shaw, which is a very notable thing. All this before the siege. So the stuff that comes after the death of Liu Ten is his spirit world journey and joining the Order of the White Lotus. But there's still that kind of more enlightened aspect from before. So I think this is a very reasonable take here of, sure, he maybe misinterprets this. Maybe he doubles down on this because, my destiny is to end the war by doing it this way. And then it didn't go so well. But they're presenting the idea that they very much seem to view Iroh as, he was an honorable character. Yes, he participated in these battles, but he never went overboard in the sense that, like, Ozai did. And that's noted in, like, Legacy of the Fire Nation, that part of, in a way, why Iroh turned out so differently is because, yes, in the Fire Nation royal family, rivalry is what they often use to stoke the fire and, in a way, force the kind of princes basically to become the next Sozin Azulon. But with Iroh, it turned out a little bit differently. When Iroh saw the way Ozai was turning out, becoming almost a carbon copy of their father, like Sozin as well, it made Iroh take a little bit of a different approach. So there's a bunch of different factors coming into play here with Iroh, but we'll go on.
Anyways, I just think you feel that, and it's because of who Mako was and the incredible actor he was, that he could impart that life experience and hard-earned wisdom, and people like Tim could just give him such great things to say. I mean, every time I hear something Iroh says, I'm like, what a wise person, and it's like...
Okay, and then they go into some clips. They don't really talk specifically about the backstory, I think, after this point. So, I don't know. Is there too much to add in there? I'd say probably the only sort of thing that you would be like, oh, wow, that's something new I didn't know before, was the sort of forced into battle aspect. And that feels a little bit like, how do we fully factor that in? But again, it's more of a casual conversation. I'm not sure if this is necessarily the sort of thing to fully like insert into canon this new take on Iroh. This all seems, I think, relatively in line with, I think, how the overall presentation of the character has been, especially in more recent years. I don't particularly think there's any new massive reveals here, but it's always interesting to see the creators talk about Iroh. And maybe it brings up the hope of, like, maybe someday we'll get some form of content that does finally, like, reveal some of these last little things that we do want to know about Iroh. And that being sort of like, yeah, what exactly was his perspective being a general? What was he trying to accomplish while he actually participated in the war? What was that vision? What did that mean to him? And so on. And especially because he was this enlightened character beforehand, worthy by the dragons, had the right way of firebending, wasn't the same sort of character as Ozai, his father, and Sozin. What's going on there? The other point that they don't really bring up here is Liu Ten as a character is something I've always wanted to know more about. Because, as time has gone on, it's become more and more clear that, okay, look at... I feel the emotion about the Liu Ten scenes when they happen, when Iroh's upset, but it would mean a lot more if we knew who Liu Ten actually was, knew what the relationship was between father and son. And again, Legacy of the Fire Nation alludes to a little bit, it has like an image or two of it, and it's like, nice, but you do want to know what way was Liu Ten turning out, and how did that all work out? Who was Liu Ten's mother? There are clear parts of Iroh's past that I think would be very nice to know about, and in my mind shouldn't be kept a mystery just for the sake of keeping a mystery. This, I don't think, now that we know so much about Iroh, I don't think this is the time to stop presenting information about him. It feels like he's a notable enough character to where I think we should better understand aspects of him, because for a lot of people it is sort of confusing that you can at the same point have the perspective on him of kind of just treating him as basically being a more Ozai-like character in the past, but then if you look at the more detailed stuff, you're like, no, I don't think that was exactly the case. and you can never be fully sure about what the exact kind of takeaway is meant to be. But anyway, that is all of the news. In terms of stuff we're waiting for, we're in March now, of course. We're obviously sort of expecting perhaps that this could be the month that the sequel to Dawn of Yang Chen is announced, because it was March last year when we got the news about the first book. And if it's going to be exactly pretty much a year on, this should be when it happens. So again, that is just pure speculation. We have nothing to suggest that that is for sure the case, but it's something to keep an eye on over the course of the month to see, does that book actually get revealed and announced. So yeah, let me know what your thoughts are on all of this. Of course, the main news, going back to it again, is that from insider information, we seem to potentially know more exact details on sort of basically the year, what ages the characters will be in this first movie, the Hidden Kingdom Echoes and Aftershocks, the first Avatar Studios project. What are your thoughts on that and everything else that I discussed in the video? But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.